This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be tuned in. We welcome you to another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. The Vicars Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And season 3 continues, and we're back with another great episode today. My name is Rob Henderson, and I am the priest and rector over at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London, Ontario.
Nicer guy you'll never find either, if I could say. You're just a great guy.
Yeah.
I like you a lot. My name is Kevin. I'm the priest and rector at St. Aidan's Anglican Church in the northwest of London, and I'm glad to be with you. And I'll go diagonally across to my buddy.
My name is Ian. I am here.
He's a man of many, many talents.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
The guy that keeps it all together.
He stirs the drink.
That's
Am I the
right.
glue?
You're the glue. You're the cream in the middle of the Oreo cookie. And
That's it. Yep.
that keeps it all together.
Progressively getting smaller?
That's right. Well, we won't go there. Our guest today in the fourth square is Phuc Luu, who's with us from Houston today. Hello, Phuc. How are you?
All right. How are y'all?
Oh, we're
Out
good.
in
Y'all
London.
doing fine in London. I got a question. I got a question off the
Yeah.
hop. What's the temperature in Houston today?
It's most likely, I'm guessing 102. It's yeah. There's been a constant heat advisory for some time, right? Oh, actually, right now it's 95.
Oh, cool.
It's
good.
gonna reach 97 later on. We've had days where it was 102.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Holy smokes.
Wow.
She's a hot one in Houston. Well, Phuc, we are so glad you're here today and can spend this time with us. We're going to be talking about your book and some other things in our podcast. And Kevin's going to give you a more formal introduction coming up here in just a few minutes for our listeners. But first, we want to say hello to our sponsors here in the Vicars Crossing that we're so appreciative of. First of all, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And hello to Dave and the staff at A. Miller George.
Great people over there, just as there are over at the Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, and locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. Carol Basada and Big Mike and Little Mike and all the people over there who get all the drugs out to people. Thanks for what you do.
Some more fantastic people over at Molly Maid also. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Trisha Lister. Like Listerine, but Lister. Thank
That's
you so
right.
much to her also. Heck yeah.
All right.
Now, Kevin, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but something tells me it's game day today.
It's game day. My Habs weren't supposed to make the playoffs. We got in by that crazy process they brought in, the 24th team to make it, the last one. Won the qualifying series against the heavily favored Pittsburgh Penguins. Now up against the heavily favored Philadelphia Flyers. We're in this 2-1, but each game, apart from the blowout, where Montreal won 5-0, the first game and the last game could have gone either way. So big game today, 3:00. Go Habs. By the time you guys listen to this, you'll know more about this than I do right now.
And we were talking to Phuc before we went on, and Phuc, you admitted fully that you are not really a hockey aficionado by any means. So we won't ask you any hockey trivia, we promise.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
So
I
I
appreciate it.
wore the outfit. For those of you who are listening to this, not seeing it, I have on the Habs hat, jersey. We're good to go today.
All right. We want to do a couple of quick pieces of silliness, though, before we get over to Phuc and talk a bit about his stuff, too, because we've been having fun with this new segment that we've put together. And it's a segment that we like to call Sickness or Suds.
Oh, sickness.
Sickness or something. So here's how we play. I'm going to give you a term or phrase or word, and you have to decide whether it's a sickness or a sud, which is just another way of saying beer.
A nice sudsy cold
'Cause
beer.
sometimes we say, yeah, let's go for a sudsy
Very
beer.
nice.
All right. So your word today is Bartonella. Bartonella. Is Bartonella a sickness or a sud? Let's start with Ian today. He's got a positive look.
You
Bartonella.
know what? For no reason other than the name, I will go sickness because
That's so you don't need to have a
Because
reason.
it's like
need that reason.
listeria.
It's
yeah,
like listen.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
why.
All right. So Bart, what'd you call it again?
Bart, as in Bart Simpson.
Yeah.
Bartonella.
Bartonella.
I stand by sickness.
Oh, listen, that's a couple I knew from Come By Chance, Newfoundland, Bartonella.
Bartonella, yeah. Already
Yeah,
good.
they're nice people, both of them. Yeah, no, Bartonella is a suds. It's a beer.
It's a beer. It's a
Okay.
beer. So
a beer.
bartender, pour me a pint of Bartonella, says Kevin.
Yeah, Italian beer.
Yeah. Italian beer. Oh, okay.
Italian beer.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Food, you want to take a shot at this? Bartonella, you think it's a sickness
So
or
it's Bartonella.
Yeah, Bartonella.
Bartonella.
So I would dare to say sudsy.
It's a sud.
I could taste the hoppiness right now.
Okay. All right.
So 2 suds, 1 sickness. And the answer is Bartonella is a sickness.
No.
Oh, wow.
It actually is. But it does have another name that you're probably familiar with, or a couple. It's also known as cat scratch fever.
Oh,
Yeah.
He was singing that when we were getting ready earlier.
Cat scratch fever.
Yeah.
And also known as trench fever.
Trench fever.
fever.
What are the symptoms of that? Rob?
Yeah.
It's just like cat scratch fever is when the cat scratches you.
Yeah.
So you can get kind of hives or scratches or stuffy nose and that sort of thing. And trench fever, from what I was reading about, was something that was occurred in World War I, and some of the soldiers brought it back, and it had to do with getting sickness and fever from being in the trenches.
Bartonella.
But the technical word is Bartonella.
Well,
Wow.
friends,
So there
you
you go.
can thank us here on the Vicars Crossing for expanding your medical knowledge.
That's right. And our final piece of silliness is directed at Ian, who we
Yes.
really have to go to for a lot of questions that come into the podcast here. And it's time now for another edition of Ask Ian anything.
Oh,
There we
wow.
go. So we ask Ian anything, and he comes up with some great answers. So Kevin, what's our question today?
So we have a question today from Squamish, BC, British Columbia. Comes from a man named Ralph.
Good name.
And Ralph from Squamish, who's sent us a message, wants to know, what is your most treasured possession?
My most treasured possession.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Ralph has got him. Ralph's got
Yeah.
him stuff.
That's a good one. I have a few. I have a guitar back here. This one leaning up against my dresser, which is my grandmother's.
Oh, what does it sound
Yeah.
like? Give us a little.
It might be out of tune.
That's okay. Well, let's see if it is. This was your grandmother's?
Yeah.
Julie? That's very nice.
That's
Very nice. That is a treasured possession.
Yeah. There's also her piano in our house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. What else do I have? I don't know. There's a few. If you ask me, like, is this one of your treasured possessions? And like held,
I'd be
it
like,
up,
yeah.
I'd be like, yeah. But off the top of my head, yeah, I don't know.
That's pretty good.
Well, those
You-
are pretty good.
I think the guitar is pretty good. And for
Yeah.
locally, those of you here in London, if you ever went to Michael's on the Thames,
Yeah.
which was a very well-known restaurant here in town, and you listen to someone play beautiful music up on the loft on a piano, That was Ian's grandmother.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And tell us her name, Ian.
Julie.
Julie.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
I'm trying to remember. Julie Lapp, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she would play. And what was really cool about her is she would read Time magazine while she was playing a tune.
Hmm.
She could be
Yeah.
playing like the most incredible piece of music in Aurea and reading
Harper.
Harper's
Yeah.
magazine or whatever. So
That's
incredible.
Yeah.
cool.
But she thought that was normal, by the way. She thought
Yeah.
like reading like the paper and playing the piano was like a normal thing for people to do. And my mom was like, that's like not normal, right? And she's like, really? Like people don't do this? Like this isn't something that normally happens? And she was like, no.
No,
So it comes as no surprise to us that Ian has the musical gifts that he does. So
Yeah.
that's good. That's good.
what about you, Robbie?
Treasured possessions?
Yeah.
Yeah, like a few family heirlooms that are important to me. Like I have a ring that was given to my dad by his parents on his 19th birthday, and he gave it to me.
Hmm.
So that was always kind of special. And something actually we're getting done, it should be done this week, is I have a old Victorian armchair of my great grandfather's
Oh,
that
nice.
we're having refinished and upholstered, and we're waiting for it to come home with that. And it has great memories because I remember sitting on his lap in it while he lived up on Bridge Street in Windsor.
Wow.
Corner of Bridge and Wyandotte, and I used to visit him up there and sit with him in that chair, and it was kind of handed down to me. So, yeah,
Cool.
it's kind of special. What about
What
you?
about me? I would say two things come to mind. One of them is hanging around my neck. It's like I'm Frodo or something like that. This is my wedding band. And the story that goes there is I got married in 1996 to Catherine Ann. And about, I don't know, 10 years later, the gold, I don't know if it was something of where it was produced, it shrunk around my finger. It just shrunk right in. It's like my finger got big around it, but really the gold shrunk. And I couldn't wear it anymore. So I took it off and I went to the jewelry store and I bought another one. And I said to the attendant at the counter, I said, now, is this good gold? She said, of course. I said, my last gold shrunk. And she said, well, gold doesn't shrink. I said, of course it did, because I could barely get it off of my finger. And she said, well, maybe you were really small then. I said, are you saying I'm fat? And then she got quite upset.
She kicked you out.
And she said, no. I said, I think I need to talk to the manager. She said, no, please don't. No. And I said, no. I realize we're kidding here. So anyway, this has been tucked away. And then I got this cheap wedding band I've been wearing for the last 10 years or so. And early on in COVID, I washed it off of my hands at some point and lost it. I've never seen it again. Only explanation I've got is I was doing this and it just went away. So I was afraid to tell my wife, Catherine Ann, that this happened. And it was a week or two later when I finally just told her. And it was around my birthday, April 19th. And she went into the room and she came out, and I didn't even know if this was even still around. And she came out with it on a chain and put it around my neck. She said, here's your original wedding band. And that was pretty nice.
Wow, that's
so
cool.
it's one of my most treasured things. And I have a clock on the wall that's made in Taiwan. It's plastic. And it was a clock I bought for my folks when I was 13 years old. And it was at the local store. And I went down and I was looking at it. It was $35. And I gave it to them for Christmas. I only had $5. I really wanted to give them this nice battery operated clock because they had this old thing with a cord going up the wall. And Craig Drover, the owner of the store, said, you should buy that clock. And I said, Craig, I can't buy that clock. I have $5. And he said, that's okay. He said, give me your $5 and then pay for it as you can. Whenever you get $5, give it to me. So the clock is the first thing I ever bought on an installment plan. I got the clock. I gave it to mom and dad, and dad loved it. Mom loved it. And then a few years, and I think I paid for it. It took me a year, and I paid the $35. And then a few years ago, we took down the family homestead, and the one thing I asked for out of the house and was brought to me was this clock. And so it didn't work. And a shout out to Barty Anderson, a parishioner here, who took it home and put new workings in it, and now it works again. It's on my office wall. Those are my prized possessions. What about you, Phuc? Do you have a prized possession?
Oh, a prized possession.
Most treasured possession.
I don't know. I just think of the people, and I don't think of people as being possessions. But now, in a way, they belong to me, and I belong to them, and so
yes.
So yeah, I don't have too many. I have objects that I may value. There's a New Testament German Bible that I have that was printed in the 1700s or mid 1700s, and so I have that somewhere among my books, and then I have behind me a stack of my Latin versions of Thomas's Summa Theologia.
Nice.
A very old set.
Okay.
But yeah, I have a lot of.
It looks like you have a typewriter back there too that came like from a long time ago.
Yes. And that was a gift from a former student of mine.
Wow.
And
What a gift. That's a good gift.
And beside that, another gift, the bust of the master of those who know, Aristotle.
Ah, okay.
That's Aristotle. Very good.
He's blurry from here, but then again, he's blurry when I read him up close too.
Well, that's great, and I'm sure we're going to get into maybe a little Aristotle today. Who knows what we'll touch upon? But we're glad you're here, Phu, and we want to give Kevin an opportunity to give you a formal introduction, introduce you to our listeners. So, Kevin.
Yeah, it's a great treat to have you on with us. I stumbled upon your book earlier in the summer or in the early COVID time, and I sat down and chewed right through it. I think you followed along at the time because I was tweeting out a number of your excerpts from your book. Phu was born in Vietnam and raised in Houston, Texas. He seeks the integration and intersection of art, philosophy, and theology. So we thought a guy who's like that should be on with us. We talk about the intersection between faith and the commons or the public square. His work has appeared in Amera Asian Journal, the Journal of Pastoral Care, the Truett Journal of Church and Mission, the Houston Chronicle, and NPR's This I Believe. Phu is published on a variety of topics such as medieval philosophy, pastoral care, theology and culture, philosophy of religion, and art and culture. He carries advanced degrees in theology from Baylor, philosophy from the University of St. Thomas, and he has served on the Nobel Peace Prize Committee for the American Friends Service Committee for the American Friends Service Committee, Quakers, for 7 years as a member. He has taught philosophy and theology at Sam Houston State University and Houston Baptist University. Phu currently teaches Old Testament prophets and New Testament Gospels at Houston's Episcopal High School and is working on his second book, a sequel to Jesus of the East, which we'll talk about today. Welcome, Phu.
Oh, thank you. I did not even know that there was a London, Ontario until you reached out to contact me. So it's so good. And apparently I have some people who have enjoyed Jesus of the East there. And other people outside of Vicars Crossing, maybe because of your tweets, have contacted me from London. So it's so good to have a small group of people in London. And maybe that's where we'll seek refuge if things don't go well here.
November 3rd. We'll welcome you on November 4th. We'll open the door for you.
Lots of room, Phu. Yeah, lots of room.
And for the first little while, you can sleep in my office here if you need to. Whatever. You'll be happy to know that the courts here recently ruled that those claiming refugee or asylum here, America is no longer considered a safe third country. That just recently happened because of all this sort of unrest and what's happening there. So
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
This was a recent court decision that for some people who've traveled, for instance, from Latin America up through the United States and into Canada, technically before that we were to return them to the country they entered, which would have been the United States, and they would deal with them as they see fit. That is no longer the case because of fear of, children being caged and so on.
Wow.
But anyway, let's jump right into a little bit of your book about Eastern Christianity, Jesus of the East. You write that the Western Roman Empire, who were the powerful oppressors from there, adopted the Christian faith, post-Constantine, granting it an elevated cultural status. So Christianity was transformed into a component of political citizenship, and the state-sanctioned church awarded a monopoly on the administration of divine grace. In America, this type of Christianity, you write, was marshaled to justify the oppression of enslaved people, a heavily redacted version of Christianity that demanded servitude and obedience from the enslaved. But enslaved Africans in America reappropriated Christianity as a religion of hope that offered escape, not in a world to come, but through literal freedom from bondage in the here and in the now. Today, Christianity must be reappropriated again by reclaiming it from the clutches of theological traditions that have perpetuated the victimization of people, our bodies, the land, and relationships around us. The Christian faith must be returned to the people to whom it rightfully belongs and for whom it was intended, those who are wounded and who have been sinned against. There seems to be a shift at work, I think, subtle as it is in North America, particularly in the United States. More and more, I think we're seeing clergy, we're seeing movements like Sojourners and the Christian left. We're beginning to see clergy marching. For instance, when we started at this, Rob and I mean, when I started anyway, almost 25 years ago, we wouldn't be found in a pride parade. But now we are in those pride parades. We are at the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. We're showing up in places where before we did not. We didn't feel comfortable to speak truth to power, so to speak, because I think the point you make in here is clear. We had become the man, so to speak. We had become the institution itself. So we're seeing people getting arrested at the border. I was in San Antonio a couple of years ago and listening to Shane Claiborne at the Oblate School of Theology. And at that time, he was leaving after we were done to go get arrested down at the border, which he did, and in solidarity with the migrants we were just talking about. So is this a part of that returning religion back to those who it rightfully belongs? Do you see, Phuc, do you see a little bit of what's happening in, like I said, it's subtle because what we hear is the loud conservative evangelical wing of the church. But I think there's a subtle shift. Can you talk about that a little bit, perhaps?
Yeah, so I see, like you said, you see that subtle shift in the media because it makes headlines as loud. I do see that on a personal level in my own life where it's not so loud, where people who I did not think would be a reader or the audience of this book recently picking it up and reading this book, and I think there is this point. I know there is a point where those who are wounded, those who are let's go back to use that term sickness, on the receiving end of the sickness of sin. They've either had enough or others have seen that they've had enough. And so what we have now in our nation is a slow move. Okay. I think on that national and systemic level, for me, I think it's too slow. But on the ground level, I do see a movement, and that's the kind of things that give me hope. So there have been, Pentecostal preachers who have quoted from my book. There have been people who have lived on the more conservative side of the spectrum, pick up and read my book and tell me about it. And so there have been all sorts of people who have really expressed interest and religiously all along the spectrum. I don't know of a denomination that hasn't, and even non-Christians have picked up my book to read and to think about. And so I know that there has been these small movements taking place that are real, that are tangible, and I'm not sure they're just reading it just because that's the thing now. People are locked down; they don't have much to do. Well, people can do a lot of other things, being locked down. But I think
Netflix. You could watch Netflix, but
yeah, play video games.
I much more enjoyed your book than Netflix.
Thank you. And so people have been taking time to read and explore, and that's led to just a lot of really neat things. Again, thinking about how we as a society can creatively bring healing to the wounded, to those who are disadvantaged, to those who are impoverished, to those who are neglected throughout our society. So I see a lot of really great work being done. And so, yeah, I do see that. I do see a shift, even though it's low on one level. I think the more important shifts are on the grassroots level.
Right. It's kind of like maybe agree. It's people are being awakened as to the fact that they've been involved or taking part in the systemic nature of this thing, and for the first time they're going, I didn't even see myself in that. Maybe is that the awakening, you think? Like we're saying, like the Black Lives Matter stuff. I had the same experience of really being hit hard by that, and then all of a sudden started to read some stuff on it and realized that I was part of the problem, and I was blind to it.
No, that's exactly right. Even some of my white liberal friends, who get through the book, they even tell me, okay, I have to be more conscientious, more conscious of the way in which I approach relationships, I talk to people, and how I see myself in the world. So I think no matter where we are, if we really think of our participation in this world as an ecosystem, right? The things we do privately, individually, do affect others. How the things we buy, how we vote, the things we say, the things we tweet. It all has to do with other people. It's whether or not we want to acknowledge that and be aware of it. That's the thing. And those who have the privilege of doing those things without that awareness, they are seeing that, okay, it does affect people. You can't,
Sure.
You can't stay isolated for that long without knowing the effects. And you see the effects, in terms of the protests and sometimes the riots and some, and all other things. But that's what's needed to get attention sometimes.
Right.
Well, our silence becomes a problem after a while, because for me or Rob or Ian, our lived experience here in North America, say, is going to be very different than your own. And there is a privilege. I mean, I've enjoyed white privilege, not to say I enjoyed it like, yay. I mean, but I've benefited because of being a cisgendered, heterosexual male, married. I fit into the poster child image. I've said this before. So, and I've spent most of my life unaware of that. And that, I think, is a challenge, right? So it's that shift for me about hearing the stories of people like yourself, Phu, and others who are Black, Indigenous, or persons of color, who are now speaking about, and have been for a long time. But as you say, some of the uprising has caused us to open our eyes.
Yeah.
And in the book, Phu, I know you spend some time talking about your story. And so I wanted to ask you about that. In the book, you described yourself as an in-betweener. And I just want to read a quote from it. You write, "I am not a citizen of one country, nor am I entirely accepted by the other. In the United States, people still ask, 'Where are you from?' And I respond, 'From Houston.' But this question is intended to draw attention to my difference, as if we did not share the same love for barbecue brisket or the same excitement when the Astros won the World Series and the same flooded roads and houses 3 years in a row." And you go on to write, "I am bound to and cannot be torn apart from the place where I live, but I am also constantly viewed as different." Jesus and his followers lived in the same way as foreigners. Can you share a little bit with us, Phu, about your experience as a Vietnamese American and how that relates to your faith and your walk with Jesus?
Yeah. So I came here with my family, parents, and a younger brother when I was 4. We left because of the Vietnam War. Uh, I was not a bold person like many Vietnamese coming here during the 70s. I had the fortune of getting on a plane. I talk about how my mother worked for Trans World Airlines at that time, and my father was in the South Vietnam Army, and he was a lieutenant colonel, and had a lot of good rapport with the American military, knew a lot of people, and so we were able to get out before things were very bad. So coming here was relatively easy for us, unlike some stories you might hear of both people coming across. But despite the ease, I always felt out of place here in America. Even though I grew up here, went to high school, college, graduate school, et cetera, here, and see myself as a Texan and an American. I know right away, in places that are majority white, I'm different. I am perceived to be different. I like feel the difference in the air. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't gone away, even though I live in the most diverse city in America, Houston. But I kind of, in reading the scriptures, I kind of have this sense that Jesus's place in his life, in his community, was very similar. That he, growing up, as the this son of a carpenter who studied this rabbinic tradition, but then was critical of this tradition and led this movement, and then spent his time with the poor, with the marginalized. I can't but wonder about his life and him feeling the differences. And then if you factor, and this is depending on how you take Jesus as the divine Son of God, or the historical Jesus, but still, even the historical Jesus, we see him not fitting into quite that space. Jesus's life is one that is lived in that tension between one vision of the world and the other. And so when I and my wife and we took several people to Vietnam about 2 years ago now, the people in Vietnam, they saw that I was an American, or at least they would call me Vicars. Vicars is a term that means foreign raised Vietnamese. So within that word, I'm a foreigner to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I was born Vietnamese, but I was raised in another land, and returned. And they would say that they when I speak to them in Vietnamese, that they picked up my American accent, and they would ask, are you Vic? And that would happen, several times in Vietnam. So I find myself in this strange space between being American and then Vietnamese born, and in also a space, I guess, in Christianity, where I'm a theologian. I write about these ideas that are not the dominant theological ideas in Western Christianity. So I'm in between that space also. And again, I came to Christianity in my later teens, early 20s, and I just reading the Gospels could not help but think that Jesus lived in this kind of in-between space, not entirely of the world in which he ministered to, and always sort of pressing against that world to establish another world that he envisioned, which we call the kingdom of God. And so he too, I think, lived in this tension, not one place, not quite another, but in this in-between state.
Sort of what I think Stanley Hauerwas 30 years ago, that book Resident Aliens, right? Yeah. It's that notion of being somehow different. Like it's, as you say, in the world he was, but not of the world, in the sense of pushing against the empire building and the establishment.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the books that was very formative when I was young, when I was probably Ian's age, reading that book, and just really finding myself or seeing myself, in that book, situating my Christianity in that. Yeah.
It's so true too of just discipleship today. We talk about on our podcast about, where does faith intersect with the public square? And those of us that are followers of Jesus, we do still, we're in that in between. We straddle this, like we got one foot in the here and now, and we're concerned about, God's creation here and now. But then the other leg is kind of straddling on the side of this new heaven, this new earth, this new vision, this kingdom of heaven that you speak of. And we kind of sit in that space, and it's uncomfortable. And, I've always thought, think about just having one leg out on both sides and straddling. It's like, whoa, you kind of go off kilter a little bit. It's not something that's always that you've got your feet on solid ground. Yeah. So certainly can understand that. I know Ian had a question for you too.
Yes, I definitely did. You spoke about America, and I wanted to ask you about that, like the current climate in America. As you know, there's an election coming up, and I think
is there an election happening?
I thought so.
Really?
I didn't know.
I heard rumor. I think the whole world is watching, to be honest. And in the wake of murders like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and like countless others, we see demonstrations going on for months now, even though they're not on the news as much. In your book, you write, justice means not only balancing the scales, but also correcting the scales that have been so imbalanced. We need to constantly ask questions about who makes the rules of the game, who makes the laws of this country. Societies have a limit to the amount of injustice they will tolerate before they resort to violent. Let me try that again. Societies have a limit to the amount of injustice they will tolerate before they resort to violent revolution against those who have held the power and privilege for too long. But we do not need to get to the point of economic meltdown to understand this, especially if we are to be a just and peaceful society. We need to see that when we attempt to correct the injustices for the few, we will bring justice for all. Now, here's a big question. Has America reached the limit of how much social injustice it will tolerate?
Yeah, no,
I just want to
really
say,
big.
When did you write this book?
I wrote it yesterday, and self-published it. No, actually 2 years ago. 2 years ago.
You have a window into the future, my friend.
I wish I really didn't. That's scary.
Yeah,
I think there is, we're coming to the point, right? So we're, COVID-19, the coronavirus has really crippled America. It's not that it wasn't crippled before, but the United States has lived in a very fragile ecosystem. So, and I read a report about systems that are highly efficient, being also systems that are very fragile also.
Right.
That anything that interrupts that system just tears it apart. And we've developed in the United States many systems like that, so for example, Amazon is shipping, et cetera, or the meat packing plants, et cetera. Yeah. And so we've developed all these streamlined systems, so we can benefit from them. But as soon as you introduce something like COVID-19
right.
into the mix, it just falls apart. Yeah. And we're experiencing that right now. We've and if you want to take that into like the system of racism or white supremacy, that is a very fragile system also. That system depends on the labor, of the few, of those who are Black and brown. If it's not labor directly, as in the cotton fields, it's labor indirectly, as in the industrial prison complex that we have, in terms of the farming that we have, in terms of the building our houses. So it's very fragile, and so we've gotten to a point where we're seeing it because of social media. We're seeing the Black and brown bodies being killed close up, and we've gotten to a point where people of color, especially Black Americans, cannot tolerate this anymore. Yeah, and we have people who stand in solidarity with us, our white brothers and sisters who cannot stand it anymore. But it's to a point where we can't look away, literally, because it's there, it's streaming for us. And so what do we do? How do we continue with this? And so we are at a tipping point right now in the United States. It's just how long are we willing to let it go until it all like smashes into pieces, right? Mm-hmm. Even our system of democracy, our Constitution as a United States, that's a very new thing. If you compare with a country like Vietnam, right, whose existence is thousands of years, mm-hmm, who fought off the Chinese, the Japanese, the French, mm-hmm, and had an American War. Our time here together trying to do this experiment called democracy is a very short time, and it's a very fragile system also. Yes. COVID-19, how do we convene, as a Congress, all that, how do we vote, all that, it's almost to a point where it's at that tipping point. It's almost at a point of obliteration, but are we willing to like take it that far? That's the question. Are we willing to like see it through to where like it's all burnt down? And that might be the alternative. I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, it becomes a question for me, like in terms of the current, and I mean, right now, every week, I mean, I keep thinking it can't get worse with Donald Trump, and then somehow or another he outdoes himself. But like every week, and now democracy is being attacked from within, right? So so now you've got somebody openly saying he's going to try and prohibit people from voting by inhibiting the mail service, for instance. So now it's a question of, and just listening to some of the speeches last night on the Democratic convention, are people going to be prepared to, I like what Michelle Obama said, pack your dinner and perhaps pack your breakfast too, because you may be there till morning, but line up and demand to vote, because every effort is being made to dissuade people from exercising democracy. So as you say, the experiment itself is fragile.
Right.
And then I look at it from the perspective of a follower of Jesus. I mean, if we indeed care about these people who are marching in the streets, and as you said, now it seems people are allied with them more than at least ever before in America. How are we going to, we need to encourage people. And we're in a different state here in Canada. We have our own issues. You talk about those systems just down the road, 2 hours from here in Essex County. It's the sort of the breadbasket of Canada. And it runs on migrant workers from Latin America. And right now, the biggest COVID outbreaks we have in the country are among migrant workers, and who are being overhoused in too many people in poor conditions, and so on and so on. So at what point do we declare that, no, we must make sure that we protect and safeguard these things which uphold the dignity of every human being?
Yeah. And that's the thing too. I want to say this sort of gingerly without disenfranchising your listening audience, because but I don't know who your listening audience is.
Neither do we.
Yeah, we don't. Never seen them.
Be free, Phu.
Okay.
Phu, be free. Say whatever you want.
Thank you. So I know how I will be voting, in November, and it's not going to be for Trump. Okay, let's make that clear.
Well, that narrows it down. That narrows it down significantly.
Okay.
It's so, but I also want to caution people as to no matter who's in the White House, these issues will need to be pressed.
Exactly.
We need to continue, because let's say Biden becomes president. Well, again, we have a white male who has a paternalistic streak in him, who looks down and sees people as needing his care, et cetera, and that's not what will help people of color and those who are disenfranchised in the United States. We need a whole reformation of the mind, the body, the psyche, in order to again bring healing to people who need bodily healing, psychological healing, all sorts of different types of healing in their lives. And so I know what we need to not do. Okay, but and this is the difficult things about liberalism, after Enlightenment. It's the things that we need to do, okay, that are the most important things, and how do we be anti-racist, how do we care, how do we support, how do we stand with, how do we acknowledge, how do we make room for. And so there are so many things that we need to continue to do amidst of all of this. And so I don't want us to get complacent at any of this. So yeah, I really think that that things are at a tipping point. We need to continue to press the conversation because we had 8 years of Obama, and those were really good years, but we continue to have a lot of problems, a lot of divisions. And what we saw in Trump was a symptom of what what was lying underneath those 8 years.
Yeah.
It's not that Obama caused any of that. I think
No.
he wanted to bring healing, but the sort of progress that we wanted to make as a country did not happen, because I think a lot of people who elected or brought Obama into power, voted for him, thought, okay, now we have black
Now it's going to be
president.
fixed. Yeah, it'll be fixed.
Yeah, he's
Now
gonna
we're
fix it
good to go.
up. See,
Trump-
we're not racist anymore.
It's a function of understanding that Trump is not the problem; he's a symptom of a larger problem,
Right.
Mhm.
and the work is going to need to continue. So your point's well taken that we can't be complacent to think that this is all wrapped up in a November election. We have the same, like I said, it's a different if it's a different country here, but we face the same systemic issues, whether it's over policing, migrant workers, and so on. So there's work to be done over generations. I really think that your book has some wisdom around Eastern Christianity, though, which is really the crux of your book, which is
Mhm.
around, understanding about solidarity in a way, that the sort of atoning act of Jesus is not so much about, a sacrificial lamb as it is about that act of solidarity of being with people. You're right. The Eastern Fathers understood the book of Romans differently than, say, Augustine. And did not see it as a teaching of doctrine of original sin. They held that rather than inheriting sin, humans inherited shame. And that the consequence of death was a reminder of the mortality of all humans face because of Adam's disobedience. They insisted that no one should be punished for the sins of their parents, but only for their own sin. So, like I said, this sort of starts to strike at the real heart of your book, which is that in the West, we've been fed a diet of a certain form of Christianity. In the East, there's been a different diet. The Jesus of the East is decidedly different than how we've grown up to accept what Jesus looks like in the West. Can you talk more about that and why that can be liberating for us in Western cultures if we were to explore a little bit more of it, please?
Yeah. So the whole premise of this grew out of my dissertation on sin and sickness, and the treatment of Han. And what I took from that research was that one, pre-Constantine, and within the Eastern Fathers, the view of sin was that it was a wound, a sickness, and even Augustine, would use that verbiage, sickness, that he would borrow,
Mm-hmm.
And that it needed therapy, it needed healing, but the main question, and this is where I take Minjung theology, the Korean theology of the people, and sort of dovetail it together with the Eastern Fathers, is that how does that sickness come about? Okay, if sin is the sickness, how did that sickness come about? Well, it came about because of acts of sin towards others. So for example, Kevin, if I did something, we were friends, and I did something to you, like I stole your most cherished possession, your ring, okay, and I took it from you because I liked it. It didn't shrink on my finger.
Yeah, no, you're not. You haven't expanded the way I've expanded.
And so I took it, but afterwards, I felt bad about it, and I said, hey, Kevin, here's your ring back. But you were the injured party. You didn't have the ring. You were looking for it. You spent so much of your time looking for it. But you were the injured party. I gave it back, but I still took your time. Okay, so I'm in church, and I'm praying. I'm saying, God, forgive me of my sins. And in any given church, in any given Sunday in the U.S., you're gonna have the pastor or the liturgist, provide forgiveness of sins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the sinner receives forgiveness. I ask God, forgive me for stealing, Kevin's ring. I receive forgiveness. I feel good about it. Okay, no longer under guilt. But then, what happens to you?
I'm still pissed.
You're the one who was hurt from all this.
Yeah.
And so in Western Christianity, we've not thought about those sin against. Okay, and so we created this system of original sin. Sin gets passed on. And no, in most churches, okay, even in the Episcopal denomination or the United Methodist denomination, there's somehow sin gets passed down. And how do you get rid of sin? You're baptized and become a believer. But all that is done as part of the sacrament of the church. And so the church holds, the forgiveness of sins, while, people who are injured, like, what do they have?
Right.
What, they don't receive anything,
Mhm.
they could go to church, confess their sins as a sinner, et cetera, et cetera. So I saw that type of system, okay, created into a systematic theology, did not lessen the sin in this world. In fact, it perpetuated the sin in this world. It caused more sin because, because as a person who is injured, I can stay pissed, or I could do more. I could take my anger out, in violent ways.
Right.
I
could hunt you down and beat the piss out of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
I would never do that, by the way. I'm just saying.
But you could.
What a nice guy.
But say we had a system where you're the injured party, and it was someone like your lovely wife who said, really that ring is just a ring. Let me go out and get you one that really fits, and let me restore something to you. And even without my involvement, or she could have called me up and say, hey, Phu, you did something wrong. I want you to make it right. I need you to make it right, because this is not, this is not just. And so she could help restore the relationship also. So there's many ways to do it, so that you would at least find some restitution and healing for the hurt that I've caused you. And I see that in that way, okay, we can both eliminate the sin and bring wholeness into the relationships that we so vitally need in this world.
Yeah, that's a great viewpoint to have. I really like that, and I kind of see a sermon coming out of that about how do we forget? Like, what is this forgiveness thing that I do every Sunday? Like, say when I go up and say, "You're forgiven," but now what? Right?
Yes,
it's not about that one thing you did. It's about what was behind all that, and how it was affecting the other party. So that's great. You mentioned Han when you were speaking there. I wanted to ask you about that in a chapter that you spend in your book about that, but I want to do it with a bit of a pretext, with the Magnificat, or the Song of Mary, as people would understand it. I just want to read part of that, and this is Mary, of course, who in the Magnificat says, "God's mercy is for those who fear him, from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty." It's a wonderful hymn of defiance, Mary's hymn, in the face of oppression, and there's no subtlety or political correctness in it. She boldly declares that God has filled the hungry with all good things, and God has pushed out the rich people, leaving them empty-handed. There's no way to
Yeah.
spiritualize Mary's message or lessen the blow of her condemnation of the rich and powerful. And those who hear this song, this sermon, must either absorb it as in the shape of reality or avoid it altogether. It's in your face. And you write about this in the chapter about Han. So I wonder if you could just share with our listeners first, for those that might not know, what is Han? What's that about? And can you tell us how Mary's song and the Korean notion of Han interacted with one another?
Yeah. So two things. I love Mary's song. This song, the sermon from this young woman's voice, that I want every evangelical in the United States to read that passage in Luke, and I want to ask, how would you interpret this literally? Okay, because there's no getting around this. There's no way to avoid it. There, Mary is speaking about what do we do with the wounded, and what is God doing with the wounded. You know, she's casting a vision too of the world in which she sees it, right? So Han is a Korean word that comes from what's called Minjung theology, or the people's theology. Andrew Sung Park, the Korean Methodist theologian, has done a lot of great work around this. But the term is a sociological term, and it goes back to the history of Korea, where there are many invasions and attempted, or not even attempted, but the colonization of Korea by the Japanese, and the hurt inflicted by the colonizers onto the Korean people. And is a term that is not easily translatable, but it's the sense of deep hurt, deep wound, almost a resentment. And I say in the book, it's like the blues. You know, if you want to translate it in terms of, you know, where do we find this in the United States, in America? It's like the blues, you know.
Cornell West would get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cornell
Yes.
West,
And,
yeah. That's right, brother.
And so here is this feeling, this sense, okay, of deep woundedness, that if it doesn't receive healing, it'll erupt, it'll fester, you know, it'll become very ugly. And in Vietnam, not too surprisingly, there is a similar word to Han. And so here are these countries that suffered empire, that suffered hardship to the people, expressing this idea of woundedness. And like I said, we have this embedded in our culture in the Americas. Maybe we don't have enough language to express it, because guess what? Those who the ones who make the language, okay, are usually not the ones who are the wounded.
They're the oppressors.
Yeah.
Yes, they're oppressors.
We're the colonizers.
Yes, exactly. And so you don't. So the people who are oppressed have to come up with the language, right? So here, Mary's song is to speak a reality, you know, to these wounds. Okay, not only to acknowledge and name the hurt, but to bring healing to the hurt. And so that becomes the vision of the beloved community, right? Our vision as a church universal. Like, how do we, as people, like, who have inherited from our ancestors, you know, this great commission, how do we go forth and proclaim from the mouth of this teenage a woman this vision of healing, of her, and so that I really see that, like, that is the place, where we can start.
Right.
That's a place.
That's perfect. That's great. Yeah, there's that and so much more in the book, obviously, and we want people to check it out. I think Kevin might have a copy that he can hold up. It's called Jesus of the East. Do we have a picture?
I have, yeah. Just give me a second.
Kevin.
Cover. Here we go.
Here it is.
It's on my. Oh no! It's on my Kindle. My Kindle app. So there it is.
There we go. There it is.
Look at that.
Perfect. Beauty.
Jesus of the East.
Jesus of the East. Phuc Luu is the author.
And you're writing a follow-up? Is that what I heard him say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm writing a follow-up. So what I imagine afterwards is creating a trinity or trilogy of books. I call it Trinity because the next one would be called Spirit of the East, and talking about the pneumatology, embodied pneumatology, the study of the Holy Spirit for the healing of trauma. And the sort of way I approach it is in an eco-feminist way. It might sound strange. I'm not gonna like lead with that, but how do we see women's voices, female voices, as being ways in which we find healing, nurture, togetherness in our world and society, and and that comes from a discussion of theological history too. And if you look at theological history, how we position the Trinity in different tradition, that Eastern church tradition, the Latin tradition, in Pentecostal traditions, et cetera, how we talk about the Holy Spirit is in a way how we talk about the spirituality of the feminine in our world. Do we like show that the Spirit somehow submissive to the Father and the Son, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that kind of book. Again, not easy theology, but I maybe a reimagining of theology.
Great. We'll look forward to that. And maybe down the road when that's out and we get a chance to look at it, we'll have you back. Okay. We'd love to be able to do that. So Phuc, thanks so much for giving us the time. We really do appreciate it, and wish you and your family well in Houston as you move forward. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Kevin and Ian. You guys are great in London. You're doing great work. Keep it up. And maybe one day, I'll find myself as a refugee.
You bet, brother.
Again.
Yeah, you are more than welcome.
In the meantime, we should mention that you are a producer of a podcast called Effing Shakespeare.
Yes. It's a literary podcast.
Yeah, and I've been listening to it. It's really quite good. It highlights writers in, I guess, the Houston and wider area. Really well done. So tune into that if you can.
Great.
Thank you so much.
All right. And thanks to our listeners again for checking us out and dropping by. We do appreciate it. And we do have to say thanks to all of our sponsors, again, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, to Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, and to Molly Maid for all of their great support. So, Phuc, thanks again. You take care. And from Kevin and Ian and myself, Rob, be good, everybody, and take care of each other. And until we get together again, Kevin, as I always have to remind you, my friend, always look both ways
before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!